My name is Phil Gatto,
And my name is Russ Kremer.
and you're listening to Ingredient Insiders.
This is Ingredient Insiders. I'm John Magazzino.
And I'm Andrea Parkins.
On each episode of Ingredient Insiders, we'll be talking with chefs and food writers about their favorite ingredients.
We then speak to the producer of that ingredient to learn how it's made, its history, and why chefs love using it in their kitchens.
What are we even talking about today, Andrea?
The prosciutto queen is talking about prosciutto today.
Oh my gosh. Oh, how did I not even remember that? It's your signature food, the prosciutto.
I know, and we've talked about prosciutto di Parma in past episodes, and this episode is going to be about American prosciutto, which is kind of like a new phenomenon, I would say, in the last decade or so.
It is a phenomenon because when most people, or at least when I think of prosciutto, I do think of Italy, or I do even think of Spain with the jamons, which are these salt-cured, aged for a long time type of hams that are very European. But you're right. It's like just in the last, 10 years that we have these hams that are produced in the U.S. that are prosciutto style.
Correct.
Because the U.S. has produced ham for, hundreds of years, as long as there's been pig farmers producing pork and curing the legs. But I think that there's a difference between the American style hams and the so-called Italian style prosciutto.
Yeah, we were looking that up together, John, that, a lot of the hams that we eat in the U.S. are country style hams. So they're typically smoked. I mean, for the holidays, for me at least, when I think of Christmas dinner or, other holidays, a smoked honey baked ham is, pure Americana.
Right. So those are literally cooked hams, either using smoke or heat or steam or even boiling. But the prosciutto is a raw ham, theoretically, right? It's cured with salt and then aged for a long time. So the salt actually does the job of cooking it with time.
Correct.
How many people are making prosciutto in the United States? Any idea?
There's not that many people that are making prosciutto. I can think of maybe less than 5 that are doing it, mass production. But, there are states like Iowa and Missouri, Mississippi that, there are a lot of pig farmers out there. And typically what I have noticed in the difference between American prosciutto and European style prosciuttos, the pigs are typically antibiotic-free, hormone-free. It's not cured, with any nitrates or, anything of that nature. It's a really pure tasting prosciutto. It's also not aged as long as it is aged in Italy. So you're looking at an 8 to 10 month cure versus up to 24 plus in Italy. So that's kind of what makes it a little bit different.
So the gentlemen that we're going to be speaking with today are with a company called True Story.
Yeah.
And they're really making this American prosciutto that's awesome. I'm really excited about this one.
Absolutely. We're going to be speaking with Phil Gatto and Russ Kremer. It's a really kind of symbiotic relationship. Russ Kremer is the farmer. He's producing the hogs. And then Phil Gatto is purchasing the legs and he is curing them to make this delicious True Story prosciutto. So I cannot wait to speak with him later.
All right. Talking all about American prosciutto today on Ingredient Insiders.
So excited, John.
This season of Ingredient Insiders is brought to you by Bazzini Nuts. Bazzini is the brand of choice among chefs in the finest hotels and restaurants. Their legacy of quality extends to gourmet retail stores, specialty boutiques, grocery distributors, and delis, ensuring you have access to their extensive range of consumer retail packages. It all started in 1886 when Italian immigrant Anthony L. Bazzini began selling nuts by the pound to bakers, street vendors, and individuals during the Great Depression. But Bazzini Nuts isn't just about peanuts. They offer a delightful array of nuts like cashews, almonds, pecans, pistachios, hazelnuts, and more, plus a tempting selection of dried fruit, including apricots, cranberries, figs, dates, prunes, and tomatoes. So whether at the ballpark, in the kitchen, or indulging in some well-deserved self-care, choose Bazzini nuts. With a legacy spanning 137 years, they're here to serve your needs with the same consistency, reliability, and quality, making them an iconic name in the world of nuts and dried fruits. Bazzini nuts, tradition, quality, and taste all in one. Taste the legacy today.
This episode is in partnership with the Chef's Warehouse and produced by Gotham Production Studios in New York City.
So today's a really exciting day. We are at Pier 17 on the South Street Seaport here. I mean, the view is amazing. And we are with two extremely special guests and kind of near and dear to my heart. We are with Russ Kremer and Phil Gatto from True Story, which is an American prosciutto company. And what I think is really cool about this conversation that we haven't really done before is we're talking to, the farmer, the hog farmer, who then, passes it to Phil, who is the prosciutto maker. And then, at Chef's Warehouse, we sell this amazing product. It's kind of full circle. So thank you for being here.
We're happy to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I guess we'll start with you because we'll start with the hog itself, Russ. So tell us a little bit. I mean, for me, like I told you yesterday when we were chatting, your story is something that has stuck with me my entire sales career at Chef's Warehouse. But I want you to kind of share how you got here. You grew up kind of as a farmer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, thank you for letting me share this. And by the way, I meant when I said you were probably the best student I ever had in as far as
Thank you.
pig husbandry. But anyway, so I was born and raised in a little town called Frankenstein, Missouri.
Frankenstein,
Missouri. The only other town by that name is in Germany, and that's the town that inspired Mary Shelley. So we have a connection there. So anyway, I'm proud of this little town. Community that I was born and raised, Osage County, Missouri. It's in the foothills of the Ozarks. So just south of the Missouri River starts the rolling hills, beautiful, scenic, isolated farming, good farms, 5th generation. So that's the typical farm in our area. And so I was fortunate to have grown up with, there were 7 of us in our family, and my mom and dad, who I was raised on a 220-acre farm. And at an early age, my dad, he says, tongue in cheek, that, you can blame him for taking me out to the hog barn whenever I was 1 year old. And I just fell instantly in love with pigs. Sometimes I think I was actually raised by them. And soon thereafter, by the time I was 3, I actually had my first job on the pig farm. And that job was to care for the runt and orphan pigs. When you have large litters, we don't want to let them die.
Sure.
We take them into the house. And so we had a wood furnace, and I'd take them down and I'd take the chill out of them, and I'd hand bottle them and raise them up until they were ready to go back to their mothers. And then when I was 8 years old, my dad gave me the first sow, my first gilt, actually. She had never had pigs, and what a thrill that was. Very special. And in fact, that first sow, she had 15 pigs and only 12 dinner plates. So I actually stayed with that sow and litter for 3 weeks right there in the nest to rotate the pigs so that they all got their nourishment. And I saved every one of them.
Wow.
So I always mean when I say that the more care and responsibility you put into livestock or farming projects, the more you get out of it. So I grew up in a sustainable farming operation. My dad, my grandfather, he was considered the best and actually the biggest farmer, although he only had 8 sows that amounted to about 150 pigs per year. Mm-hmm. And he'd send them to St. Louis. And my dad learned from him, and I learned from my dad. But it was always about caring for things. It was not about scale. It was about, caring, being good stewards of what you had. Our farm was actually considered small, 220 acres. The most sows that my dad ever had when he was, starting his family was 30 sows, 30 cows, a group of chickens, a big garden, and 7 kids. That's what he raised. Full-time farmer, never had an off-farm job, made money every single year. My mother had the luxury, but she stayed home to support my dad through homemaking and on the farm and bookkeeping and things like that. And so that's how I grew up. I tell people that my childhood, growing up in that community at that particular era, was the greatest of times, primarily because I learned all these things, and we were probably poor, but I never knew it, and we made
Rich
it just
on
fine.
love.
Exactly, rich on love.
Yeah.
And a really important aspect of things was the fact that because we made money, there was, farmers that actually could make money if they worked hard, and they in turn reinvested into Main Street, Frankenstein, Missouri, and they bought things. And I learned at an early age what it took to sustain a rural economy. So anyway, fast forward to my education then, So I always had swine on the mind, and that's all I ever wanted to do in my life. That was my purpose. And graduated from high school and was taught my class, whether that's a big deal or not. But anyway, my dad told me, you can do anything you want. You don't have to come back to this farm. You don't have to raise pigs. Go off to the big city and do something else. And so, no, that's what I want to do. So when I left for college at the University of Missouri in Columbia, that was my goal. My goal was to learn everything I could and every aspect there was to be the best pig farmer I possibly could and bring that knowledge back home to the family farm. So I graduated. In fact, I made a deal with my dad that I'd even get out in 3.5 years rather than the typical 4+. And so I got out early, couldn't wait to get started. But what kind of like stared us straight in the face was the fact that small farm couldn't provide 2 incomes. Mm-hmm. And so, I examined and you gotta know that back then, even though I went to school, farmers such as myself got most of our education and timely knowledge from allied industry. In other words, the feed company, the seed company, the pharmaceutical company, the swine genetics company, the equipment businesses or whatnot, because, they did a lot of research and instantly you could get that. And by the way, they presented that information with hopes that they'd sell you something.
So they would come around to the farm and give their pitch and try and teach you about the feed and the equipment that you should be using and things like that?
Absolutely.
Got it.
And they had the up-to-date information where, say a land-grant institution, it often takes 15 to 20 years for that information to disseminate.
Got it.
So it's behind the times. So that's what we did. And, I'm not saying that as an excuse, but that's where I gleaned my knowledge. And so there's 2 things. I always I say that every day I vow to be a better person I was the day before, but I also admit that some days I fail miserably. I failed miserably in a couple of aspects when I came back to the farm. Number one was to convince my dad that the fastest way and the quickest way that we could get up to 2 incomes was by building a facility that actually could accommodate more pigs in a confinement type situation. Before we were using bedding and allowing our pigs to go outside and freedom, but back in the 80s, that's when consolidation, concentration, and vertical integration really took a shot, forward. And so that's what we were going through. And so the industry was going through changes, and modern confinement, slatted buildings, mechanically ventilated, manure systems underneath, that was the trend. And it seemed appealing to me because we could get our numbers to a point where, we could survive. And so we did that. That was a mistake where I failed. And I blame myself, not anybody else. The second mistake that was made was that bought into this feed additive concept that the pharmaceutical companies were basically pitching. And it wasn't sold. I'm talking about a feed additive that you would put in every ton of feed with the promise that the pigs would grow faster, would be more efficient, would have more survivability. But then the bottom line, you're going to make 5 to 10% more profit. It was very appealing. And it kind of pitched it even that when you fed this additive, that it would actually even make the pigs healthier. That's what how it was implied. But the fact of the matter is, these were antibiotics. Yep. And not just antibiotics, but they were humanly important antibiotics such as penicillin, tetracyclines, things like that. But we fed that in these low dosages, and nobody, you never heard the term superbugs or what this possibly could do. So
they were painting this picture that what you were doing was good, and that you were feeding them something that was going to
be good for the pigs and then also good for your pocket.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And both are, hey, those are a couple of the legs of sustainable farming. It's economically, it made sense. Environmental, it all made sense. And,
but you learned the hard way that wasn't true.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. So anyway, just, within a year after we put the building up, within a year after we really, adopted this practice of feeding the antibiotics, it culminated. First of all, I started seeing the effects of sick pigs. Used to not have sick pigs, but I'd go into that new building and every day I'd have to inject my pigs with a therapeutic type of antibiotic to get them over this illness. And I'd have to do that twice a day. Probably would treat 75% of the pigs. It was a sickening moment for me and demoralizing because I love pigs and why were they sick? So that happened. And it culminated on a spring day in 1989 when I was driving a boar hog, a male pig, to a group of females that needed to be bred. And that boar was kind of hostile and he turned around and his tusk landed in the bottom of my knee. And he gored me and didn't think anything of it. Basically poured out the blood out of my boot and carried on and never thought anything. About a week later, my leg was starting to hurt and swelling about 50% greater than what the size normally would be. And so I treated medical attention and went to a doctor who said, no big deal. You probably got a strep or a staph infection. Sure. And I'll give you a dose of penicillin and that will cure it. And so not only did the penicillin not treat it, but 7 other antibiotics that they tried to no avail. My condition kept getting worse until I got septic. And I felt it racing through my heart and through my bloodstream. And so finally the doctor said, I can't do it. I don't know what to do. I said, it
you better come up with something.
It doesn't look good. So I went home and I had, while I was grieving or fearing for my life, I had an aha moment thinking that, I had something similar happen to my pigs. And I remember having my pigs examined through serology, where they actually paired the different antibiotics against this certain pathogen. Mm-hmm. The pathogen was strep suis, which was a strain of strep, and I looked through those reports, and the first 8 of the antibiotics were resistant to it, and finally there's one at the end. Oh, by the way, here's one that's sensitive to it. Mm-hmm. In other words, that could actually maybe cure it. So I pointed that out to my doctor, saying that this drug is in the cephalosporin family, and oh, by the way, I think that you should treat me with that. Put me in the hospital, gave me an IV solution, and it cured me. Yeah. I saved my own life, so I'm very thankful for that.
But that really was like a kind of like, obviously, when you're faced with, potential death, it's scary, but it kind of like you walked out of that hospital and you changed the way that you think about farming.
Absolutely. While I was in the hospital, while I was on my recovering bed, mm-hmm. and I first of all, I went through this feeling of remorse because I realized that I created this superbug. Sure. That basically feeding a subtherapeutic level of antibiotics constantly, that it was killing off the weak ones, the strong ones were propagating and mutating, and mm-hmm. first thing you know, there was a drug that no drug would cure. Yeah. And so I was remorseful about it. I was selling breeding stock to other neighbors, for instance, and I spread the disease that way. I thought maybe could it have made other people deathly sick? And so I was going to quit farming. I was going to quit. I said, shame on me. Mm-hmm. And so my friends talked me out of it, made me realize that this was my purpose in life. And they said that, Russ, instead of quitting, you should come up with a solution. So I plotted a new course. And that new course had to be, we're going to figure out a way and teach people how to raise pigs without antibiotics. And so I realized you had to have clean ground. So I went to I had just purchased my great aunt's farm, and it was a secluded place, very wooded. Most people didn't want it because it had too many woods and rocks mm-hmm. and trees on it. So I went there. I exterminated my dirty herd, and I got clean stock. I embryo transferred some genetics that I pinpointed that were healthy and they thrived. They were happy pigs that resisted this kind of thing, and I implanted that stock into there. I had a new feeding regimen. I was only going to feed the whole natural grains, non-GMO, and give them access to forages. And the new facilities that I built, we're going to have all access to the outdoors. I can rotate the pastures in the woods and things like that. And then finally, probably most importantly, I said, I'm going to kick the drug habit.
Yep.
And so I can tell you today, by implementing all those things, even though I had lots of skeptics, that after 35 plus years, that I'm drug-free. My pigs are drug-free.
And I think Phil is probably happy that you didn't quit and that you kept going, because now Phil at True Story is making some of the best prosciutto I've ever had. But I know that your kind of lineage goes way back, further than True Story, right? You kind of grew up since you were 10 years old in the charcuterie business?
Yeah, 1957, I was 10. My father and uncle went from bartenders to my grandfather's small little bar in downtown San Francisco and decided to buy a salami factory. I was 10, tagging along with my dad and go, I think he's cool, so it's cool for him. It should be cool for me. So he loved it. My uncle loved it, and away we went. Kind of fast forward a little bit. When we were kids, small families, my father and uncle both mentored me and the rest of the family, but two guiding principles every week was people and quality. So take care of people and no compromise on quality. Well, then you fast forward, I didn't just thinking about it now, Russ, was 89. That's about the time that Whole Foods started to expand. Mm-hmm. And Whole Foods was there. They want a more natural product. They were making sure that the animals were only given therapeutic drugs and taken out of the herd versus subtherapeutic. I think that's a big part of what you're saying, Russ. We went to subtherapeutics and you got the medicine whether you need it or not. So there was a real line of definition change with Whole Foods. About that time there, I'd grown up in the salami business, and to kind of see where we are today, back in North Beach for the Italians that came to San Francisco, they brought a Milano-style salami with mold, mm-hmm. European-style sourdough bread, grapes that came. So we were in the food business, and you tried to match things together. Well, around that time of doing the Whole Foods, we said, hey, let's see if we can't increase the quality and really shoot as a target to develop products for Whole Foods. Yeah. At that point there, it was like I was talking to a friend, and they said, hey, there's a couple guys in the Midwest. There's a guy, Russ Kremer. Mm-hmm. So this city kid ends up, I got to track it back to the source. And I end up in Missouri with Russ. So
that was in what year?
That was in 2007. 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Russ had churned things around. Mm-hmm. We saw the avenue to make better products. The products we were making, at that time, we wanted to have the best artisan products. Mm-hmm. You had farm to fork, farm to table. So we're going to go make salami or prosciutto. Let's go get the very best meat.
Yeah.
The ideal part of that was you had to buy the whole carcass. So then we had to utilize the whole animal. But Russ and I drove around for almost maybe 3 years as we were developing True Story.
Big road trip.
And got to know each other. I think I and a bunch of partners came together and we said, hey, this is our avenue. So True Story is a natural and organic meats. And we went back to Russ. I think the things we're really proud of is we've got generations behind us. Mm-hmm. And when you look at people and quality isn't always that much more expensive. So when we went back there, I was riding with Russ and we're trying to figure out, Russ, you're raising these pigs. Ideally, we should buy the whole pig and further process it. So how do we make that work? And so we're driving around, let's put our minds together. And so we're proud at True Story that most of our products that we purchase, we're going to call it a True Story Fair Trade, which means we contract almost all the animals that we contract with for further processing. We once a year go through a pricing model mm-hmm. that Russ and a group of people connected to the farmers update, mm-hmm. and 65 or 70% of the hog is corn and soy. And so this time of the year, in fact, it was last Thursday, we fixed the price for the coming year.
Okay.
So the farmers have a predictable
so
pricing
they know
model.
And they can count on that business.
Yeah, I think we're one of the very few that's going to say, it may not always be the price you want, but It should cover your cost plus a profit. And that's kind of where the city kid went to the country kid. And then we start to build this community, which means you got to go back to the ingredients. Then you got to have somebody like ourselves, the further processors. And then we need Chef's Warehouse, which is great here today.
Yeah.
Showing the products. And the people we show those products today connected to consumers. So, I mean, there's this community.
Absolutely.
That brings everybody together.
That's why I was so excited to talk with both of you, to like kind of like talk about this like circle of life, if you will, that's happening between all of our companies, and like even like learning that you're taking it back to the farmer, making that commitment, investing, you know, ahead of time to say like, I'm going to take X amount of product. Like that's not really done very often. So, I mean, hats off to you for, you know, doing that. And I think when people hear that, they're going to want to invest in buying True Story.
They like to understand it.
Yeah.
And curious, we have a name, True Story. We went through all kinds of names. And
yeah, I was going to ask you, where did that come from?
Well, we were looking for names. And then one of my buddies, our partner, says, coincidentally, somehow years before that had registered True Story and we could use it. So he said, hey, this is what greater platform do we have than to tell our story? The road isn't perfect, but at least our intent is there.
Sure.
And people are starting to recognize it.
I think the booth upstairs is very busy. So I think definitely people are recognizing the quality.
When they say quality, let's go back to Russ for a second, I think. And I feed and breed. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So for the prosciutto, what is the breed of hog?
And Phil and I talking, and you know, I told Phil that I actually went over to Europe first time in 1999, basically to see what they were doing. In marketing, I learned all this whole thing about relationship marketing, where consumers were connected to the farmers, and I ended up in Parma region. And you know, as the farmer, I realized it starts on the farm. It starts with what I learned and what I've coined in my mind anyway was for true good artisan heirloom pork, you got to focus on the breed, the feed, and the need for tender loving care. That's how I remember that all the time.
The breed, the feed, the need for tender loving care. I love that.
It is.
It makes a difference.
Right, 100%.
There's not one secret. It's all of that. The breed. You know, we don't. You know, I'm a trained geneticist, and, you know, and call animal breeding or whatnot. Back in the day, by the way, my degree was in animal husbandry. That kind of, you know, that means basically teaching you how to care, you know, daily and tend to the needs of the pig. But what I learned is through my experience in the last 40 years that a blend of heirloom breeds and lines is what makes the ideal quality. For one thing, when you combine those different breeds, and so we use Durocs, we use Berkshire, we have some of our farms have Tamworth, which is an old line of pigs that were selected, not necessarily for meat quality, but for vitality and vigor and ease of movement, and in turn that made the most impeccable quality. So we were rewarded by that. So that's on the genetic side or the breeding side. We use that blend of heirloom. On the feed side, we make absolutely sure, number one, that we don't feed the garbage. In other words, I have meat science training too, and I've learned that you can alter the composition of the fat. If you want good quality fats, you feed good quality feed that excludes things such as bakery products or the dried distiller grains that's a byproduct of the ethanol plant that contains these large amounts of polyunsaturated fats that in turn make poor quality pork and pork that can go rancid, for instance. And
so
how
right
important
now,
is that with
that's
prosciutto
what
ham?
commodity hogs are eating?
Yeah, that's a typical diet. Typical diet is a lot of dried distiller grains because now we turn our corn into fuel, but what do you do with this byproduct?
Yeah.
So the pig thing, it's loaded with these bad fats, and that's just what it is. We go out of our way to make sure that our rations, and we have high standards, and we inspect those standards. We have audits to ensure that these standards are in place, and so we feed what is good, and then of course no antibiotics. If a pig has to be treated therapeutically, that goes into a different system, but no animal. I mean, we teach our farmers, how to, what are some of the alternatives, how to keep pigs healthy so you never need them. And then, of course, the need for tender, loving care. I mean, that's my favorite because, I'm a pig whisperer, I guess. And, and our farmers take that very seriously. They're proud of that. And they found that, when you do provide all that care and attention, and our farmers, I think one of the great aspects of our model, Phil, is that our farmers own the pigs. Our company doesn't.
How many farmers are in? Is it a co-op?
It's a network of farmers.
Okay.
It's not officially a co-op, but it's a network of farmers that we have a close relationship with and have the same passion and goals. But we have about 125 farmers, I believe, Phil, now, and they're all shapes and sizes, but they have one thing in common: a passion to treat animals with respect. And so that's what we do. And in turn, they're rewarded because they produce better, and we're rewarded. Phil's rewarded because he's got a better product to start with.
It's interesting when we talk about the prosciutto.
Yeah.
It's just one piece of meat, okay? It's not flavored. All we do is put it down in salt. Mm-hmm. And I think even at the show today, people were going, wow. And when you take the feed and breed, and you taste the prosciutto, it's always got a nice fat cover, but the fat is sweet.
Yes.
And you hear people go, ooh, there's something different. Mm-hmm. It's the sweetness of the fat.
Yes.
As simple as that is. Mm-hmm. But you just have a very large piece of meat that's mildly, it's not even seasoned. We just salt it and then cure it.
It's pork, salt, and air.
That's it.
That's literally the recipe for prosciutto.
So you better have the best ingredient.
Right.
And if you don't have it, it could be good, but it's not going to be great.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, and the pork itself is even sweet. The marbling is there. I'm call myself the prosciutto queen, as everyone knows. So I've eaten quite a bit of prosciutto, and you see it in the slices. You can see the marbling of the pork. You can see that beautiful white, delicious fat that you're talking about. I mean, it's like no other.
Even when you look at the fat, when you take that leg and we get ready to slice it, the fat is firm. It's not soft.
Yep.
So when you go back to Parma, they like a nice, hard fat on the outside. And so by the breed and feed and the farmers and processors and distributors and consumers, and I think it's getting more traction.
Absolutely.
I think even at your show today, you're saying downstairs that we're bringing ingredients to people to make great meals. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and so it's exciting, and we're pleased to have the opportunity to share this story, and hopefully it invigorates people to look at their food and go, "There's a lot behind the things I get at the grocery store."
Absolutely, I think that's like you go and you see a package, right? You see a leg of prosciutto sitting in a deli counter, or even pre-sliced that's sitting in like a refrigerator, and you pick it up, you put it in your bin, you take it home, you eat it, and you probably don't think about Phil and Russ and the hogs. And for me, it's something that I take very seriously. We have to think past the box, the jar, the packaging, and really consider what we're eating every day. Because if not, the food's not going to be here in a few years.
But to your point, some wise person once told me that the greatest diet plan is one that you're describing, and that is that every bite that you eat, if you consciously think about where that product came from, how it was raised, who raised it, the care they put into it, if you did that and you went to a fast food chain, you would probably spit it out. Yeah. And that's what we do. And I think one of the things, I don't ask for much. One of the things that I ask as we have this conversation is that people do keep that in mind and respect and give dignity to the animals and the people throughout that whole process that really worked and really paid attention to details and the kindness and dignity that they showed to the animals, that when they eat it or when they cook it, that you think, oh, this is a substance, this is life, this is something that sustains life, and
it's a sacrifice for us.
It is.
It truly is.
And it's not just this fuel that you stop by in a drive-through and fill up. This is something that's special. And I had people often ask me, how can I even let my pigs go? And I say because of that, I feel I have a purpose. And I feel the pig has a purpose. And I realize that we have to, sacrifice for humanity.
Sure.
And it's healthy stuff. And we're very proud of what we do.
I guess we're thankful for you inviting us today.
Yes.
Because this gets everybody to pause for just a few seconds.
Exactly.
And like you're saying, we sit down to dinner and look at the food and go, there's a lot behind it.
Yep.
And if we respect our food and take a little time to share the stories behind it.
The true story.
It's great. The true story. There you go.
There we go.
And good community.
Yep.
It's awesome.
Absolutely.
High five, Russ.
Yeah.
We're not giving up now.
I'm feeling the love in this room right now.
The community.
What is next for the two of you? I'm picturing you guys like driving around in 2007. So now, 2023, what's the plan?
I guess we got to look at that animal and figure out, okay, what other products can we make that are in demand and make them at the highest quality and see if we can have a little fun along the way.
Absolutely. I want to try. I would like to be a taste tester for any new products.
You're on.
Well, I know that Phil, you're not a chef, not a cook. But we always like to ask, what are the 5 pantry staples that you can't live without?
I will tell you right now, okay? So I will say, I'm not a cook, so I'll take some nice bread out, toast it. I'll take mayonnaise, mustard, and pickles out, okay?
Okay.
A nice piece of cheese, 3 slices of True Story ham. Put those together and cut it in quarters.
That sounds like a really good sandwich.
And I think I'm like a little kid and it's a treat.
That sounds good to me. Russ, what about you?
Well,
I feel like you have to say pork.
I do. Pork.
Okay, we're done.
I want to make a comment on that. I've been a bachelor all my life, but I have been a principal caregiver to my elderly parents in the last, since COVID, I guess. And one thing that I'd always comment to my dad's heart doctor, who said, this guy's got the blood pressure and the vital signs of an 18-year-old. It's consistently, his blood pressure was perfect. I mean, it was.
God bless him.
And so I looked at him and I said, it's the pork. I serve him at least one serving of our True Story pork every meal, or every day. Not every meal, but every day. And, if you read about these healthy fats that's in this pork, I said, it lowers blood pressure.
So, Russ, let me ask you, you probably go to 135, then you let it rest a few minutes to get to 145, a little pink. Is that a perfect pork chop?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do. I turned out to be a really good cook. My dad's appetite was ferocious. And, of course, the doctor looked at me like I had 4 heads. But the fact is I'm very passionate about it. I mean that. It's healthy. It's good. I mean, all those things, including his appetite and his unfortunately, my dad passed a couple of weeks ago at 97, but he had the best quality of life. Oh, it's fine. He's with me. And he's so proud. He's so proud of what we've done.
Absolutely.
And then, but he's a
Did
big
he ever
part
talk to you about that? Like, did you have like conversations about kind of like what he started and like what you've done?
We did, especially the point about the economics of it, the pricing system. And he knows it. He always kept track of the markets, and he knew that sometime commodity pork was bringing half the price that our pork was. But we made this commitment to our farmers to make sure that they didn't lose any money, or they had the opportunity, not a guarantee, an opportunity to make some kind of a profit and some kind of a living wage every year on every pig. He was so proud of that because in his day, farmers were simply price takers, took what they had, took what they could get the market. So he was proud of that, and I'm so grateful to what he taught me. And I'm so proud that he made those comments before he passed.
That's a good memory. And if I get to eat prosciutto every day and claim it's healthy, then I will be a very happy human. So you just gave me permission, Russ. Thank you.
We're not going to let you down.
No. But thank you both of you so much for being here. This has been a dream for me, something I've been waiting to, to sit in this room with both of you. So thank you for your partnership with Chef's Warehouse, and go to your nearest grocery store or chefswarehouse.com for True Story prosciutto. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Your Highness.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ingredient Insiders. Follow us on Instagram @Ingredient Insiders. You can find the products we discussed on today's episode at chefswarehouse.com or at your favorite specialty retailer.